Entry hazards are moves that damage a Pokemon when they switch in. Stealth Rock has always been important, but in Generation 9 in particular, hazards are more powerful than ever, and there are a few reasons. Pokemon like Goldengo and Dragapult are making removing hazards harder than ever. Terraghost is also a very common type on leads to deny rapid spin as well, and the overall power level is so high in this generation that even a little cheap damage often turns a 2-hit KO into a one-shot. Hazards hurt every switch, so players fight for them early. A hazard advantage can decide games even before the offensive core hits the field, and contrary to popular belief, hazards help offensive teams the most. Yes, bulkier teams often rely on hazards for a win condition, but they also need to switch in constantly to wall hits. Offensive Pokemon don't really care if they are 100% or 87% HP, they will die if they do not get the first hit anyway, so rocks on both sides are a net win for them. And because defensive Terra can save a fragile Pokemon for one more turn, sweepers are often incentivized to Terra and stay instead of switching out and coming back later. Also, many booster energy Pokemon would rather trade damage and die than switch out and leave because they cannot function without their boost, that is also a thing. But I don't wanna sit here and complain about the meta problems in Gen 9 OU video. Let's start by understanding every hazard and removal move in the game. The hazards. We have 4 types. Stealth Rock. This is mandatory on every team. They do 12.5% damage on the switching, and it is rock damage, so weak types take 25% or even 50% with a quadruple weakness. It hits flying Pokemon too. I can't stress this enough. Every team needs to be built around and account for setting and removing Stealth Rock. Spikes. They do damage on the switching to grounded Pokemon only. One spike is gonna do 12.5% damage like the rocks, 2 are gonna do 16.67%, which is a very small jump from 1 to 2, but 3 spikes will do 25%. Toxic spikes. 1 spike is gonna poison on the switching, and 2 spikes will toxic instead. The steel type and flying type Pokemon are immune to them, and switching into a poison type will actually remove them from the field. They aren't really common outside of Glimora because they are really easy to remove. Sticky Web. They lower speed by 1 stage on grounded Pokemon, and it is almost only seen on hyper offense teams. There is actually 6 options for denying or removing a hazard, and that is, first of all, Rapid Spin. It is a normal attack that clears hazards and boosts your speed by 1 stage. It cannot hit ghost types, and that's why Terraghost is so common, especially on leads. Then we have Defog. It removes all hazards, it is way more reliable, and it doesn't do contact, but it clears the enemy side of the field too. It is technically a stat reducing ability, so Goldengo can block it. It lowers evasion, it is useless. Mortal Spin. Glimora's poison type attack, it is basically Rapid Spin, but it poisons the target. Of course, because it is a poison attack, steel types are immune and can block it. Court Change. It is Cinderace's signature move, it swaps your hazards with the opponent. Magic Bounce. It's Hatterin's ability, it reflects hazards back when you throw them. And finally we have Tidy Up, which you are only gonna see it on Mouse Hold, it's the only Pokemon viable that can use it. It removes all the hazards and it boosts attack and speed. Is very niche. There is also an important part of the hazard game, and that's the new item, Heavy Duty Boots. Of course, Heavy Duty Boots are insanely powerful because they let your Pokemon ignore hazards when they switch in, but Boots did make some Pokemon that were crippled by Stealth Rock viable again, for example Moltres, and while yes, there are some teams that like spamming Boots, running 6 pairs of Boots is rarely a good idea, you still probably need hazard removal in some way. Now that we understand the toolkit, we can talk about every archetype of hazard Pokemon and what they counter. First of all, we got Gliscor and Tinglu. They are the bulky setters of OU. Gliscor can throw rocks, spikes, and even toxic spikes, and it has Poison Heal, which is basically double leftovers and an immunity to status. It also has the best freaking typing in the game with Flying and Ground, which makes it pretty much freaking unkillable if you do not run Ice Beam. On the other side, we got Tinglu, which can reduce the enemy's special attack by 25%, which is probably the strongest special wall in the game. It can also do rocks and spikes, and they both fill the same niche. They are the classic unkillable stackers that you can see on balance and stall teams, and they shut down every single all-in strat like disposable leads or court change. You can also see Garganacl fill a similar function, but that's more niche. Then we have Samurott Hisui, Garchomp, and Landorus Tyrian. Those are the offensive setters. Samurott has Ceaseless Edge, which is an ability that lets it set spikes while doing really good damage. It is an attack. Garchomp can also set rocks and spikes, and it can punish spinners really hard because it has rough skin and it usually runs Rocky Helmet for double contact damage. There is also Landorus Tyrian, which used to run different tanks. It could fill different archetypes in this hazard metagame, but not anymore because it lost Toxic, so it is almost always in this offensive setter role. It can do rocks, and it has U-turn and a very strong Earthquake. They are common on offense and bulky offense teams because they can still provide an offensive presence on the field. They tend to do poorly against court change and removers in general because they aren't expected to live past the second switching. They are not disposable in the sense that they aren't supposed to just drop hazards and die. They can do other things, namely damage, but they also aren't expected to switch out and come back later. Except for Landorus. Landorus can do that and is expected to pivot out after dropping hazards. Then we have the proper disposable leads, which in the meta of OU are gonna be Deoxys, Speed, and Glimora. Deoxys Speed is by far the fastest lead in all of OU, and it can use Taunt to block opponent hazards before setting its own hazards. It can do spikes and rocks. And Glimora is slower, but with every physical hit it can drop toxic spikes because of its ability Toxic Debris. So with a focus sash it can secure Stealth Rock and 2 spikes, provided it gets hit by a physical attacker, but both of them are supposed to do little more than run Terra Ghost and drop hazards and die, which is why we call them disposable. It is a very high commitment, it is a full Pokemon just for the hazards, plus a Terra Ghost usually, so they are only seen in teams that require a hazard advantage at the start of the game. Most commonly Hyper Offense, but there are some other use cases. They get countered by any sort of removal in general that can come in later and get rid of all their work, because at that way you are working at a one Pokemon disadvantage, but on the same time it is also expected that the game is not gonna last long with this Pokemon because they work on hyper offense, and extremely offensive teams of like 5 sweepers, they have a game plan of trying to kill the remover before it gets to remove the hazards, pretty much. Then we have Corviknight and Whizzing Galar. They are the defensive removers. They have defog, both of them. Corviknight is the obvious choice in here. It has amazing defensive typing with flying and steel. It has crazy physical bulk in particular. It can tank a lot of damage, so it can actually switch into physical attacks, tank them, and then defog to remove the hazards. We also have Whizzing Galar, which is common, but it is more niche. It is less bulky, but it has more damage. It has psychic and poison coverage, and it has the ability Neutralizing Gas, which lets it ignore the ability of the opponent, and in turn it can defog when Golden Go is on the field. Of course, it also gets one shot by Golden Go in most sets because Make It Rain does stupid damage and it's super effective, but for the most part, Whizzing Galar can still work if you need Psychic, Fairy or Poison coverage, and Corviknight doesn't really have any counters. Of course, the real problem is not their counters, but the fact that they offer a little more than hazard removal, so there is an opportunity cost of running Corviknight or Whizzing unless you want a wall. And that's why you often see them in more balanced or defensive teams. They are a very safe choice. And that's about it. Then we have Great Tusk and Iron Threads. They are the hybrids. They can remove hazards and set hazards at the same time because they are spinners that can also do Stealth Rock. Of course, Great Tusk, as you are aware, is the most popular Pokemon in all the meta. It is clocking at 40% usage in every team, which is insane. We also have Iron Threads, which fills a similar niche, but it is more of an aggressive Pokemon. It is faster and it has usually more special attack, and it also gets Volt Switch for pivot, which is something that Great Tusk doesn't have. Tusk usually builds bulky with leftovers or Rocky Helmet, and Threads usually leans more offensive with something like Booster Energy. Both are very flexible hazard hybrids and they fit almost any team, but they tend to struggle against any flyer Pokemon. We're talking Landorus, Corviknight, Gliscor. They all can do decent damage to them and they can't retaliate. Then we have Cinderace and Hatterene. They are the Disruptors. They do not really have a removal move or a setting move. In the case of Cinderace, he can disrupt hazards with Court Change. It can flip over the field, so your hazards are gonna go to the opponent and vice versa. Cinderace just so happens to be a really good physical attacker and pivot, and for that reason it shows up mostly in offensive teams that do not wanna commit too much for hazards. It is both setting hazards and removing them in a single move, so it is by far the lowest commitment option. Then we have Hatterene on the other hand. Her ability Magic Bounce can just bounce incoming hazards. When an opponent is gonna throw rocks, you can just switch into Hatterene and bounce them back. Hatterene has really good typing in Fairy and Psychic, so it can tank a lot of stuff from common leads. Both Hatterene and Cinderace cover a similar niche as a low commitment alternative to get around hazards. They are a lot more all-in in nature and they struggle against the long-term solutions like defensive removers or the bulky setters. But Hatterene also has an extreme counter in Samurott Hisui because Samurott can hit Hatterene the entire time and can drop the spikes at the same time, and they cannot be bounced because it is technically an attack and not a status move, and they are more of a complementary Pokemon for a team that already has some sort of hazard setting or removal, but they do counter disposable leads in general very hard. And then we have the Sticky Web Setter. That's only one Pokemon really because Ribombee is pretty much obsolete, outclassed in every way by Araquanid, which is the de facto Sticky Web Setter now. Araquanid is Water and Bug, which is a deceptively good typing for a lead. It has Water Stab and is really strong because it does double damage because of its ability, and it obviously sets Sticky Web. It is not entirely disposable, it is more like an offensive setter, I guess you can call it that, but you are only gonna see it in very specific teams that are built around Sticky Web. They are not that common. Mostly bulky offense. Just like the disposable leads, it tends to get countered by removal and also by walls. Finally, this is technically not a hazard Pokemon, but I have to talk about it because it is such a defining factor in this meta, and that's gonna be the spin blockers. There is two. As you guys know, Rapid Spin is a normal move, and that means that if you try to hit a Ghost type with it, it's not gonna go off, so you're not gonna be able to remove hazards if the opponent is a Ghost type. And in Gen 9 OU, we have two extremely popular Ghost types. That's gonna be Dragapult and Goldengo. Goldengo is even better because it is still type 2 on top of Ghost, so it is immune to Mortal Spin because that's a poison move, and it also has its ability Good as Gold, which makes it immune to Defog, and this single ability is extremely broken. As long as Goldengo is on the field, you cannot remove hazards. Dragapult is a Ghost type and it doesn't stop removal as thoroughly, of course, but it is still a top tier sweeper and extremely popular, and that's the problem. It makes the problem a lot worse because two of the most common Pokemon in the tier can freely just switch into Rapid Spin, and because they are good Pokemon on their own, they can often just get a kill right after anyway. Because the two most common Ghost types in the game are very aggressive Pokemon, removing hazards is not only hard, it is now risky. It can be countered relatively easily, and in turn that makes hazards a lot more powerful than they used to be. And now that we finally understand the meta, we can finally go through how you build hazards into a team. The first rule of team building is very simple: you never skip Stealth Rock. That's it. It's the most powerful move in the game. If you think you don't need it, you are wrong. Next, you are gonna check your team's style and win condition. A disposable lead makes no sense in stall, of course, and a slow remover, for example, will drag down a hyper offense or a weather team. your hazard setter has to match the pace of your team. Hazard removal is more optional, you can skip it sometimes if your team doesn't mind the chip because it is hyper offensive or because it resists mostly rocks in general. That can sometimes be something you can skip. But if you cannot come up for a good reason to eat that cheap damage, or if you are sacrificing really good items to take heavy duty boots, take removal instead. You can use, for example, magic bounce or court change as a removal tool. They are often unreliable and they do not really cover for the entire thing on their own, but they are a good complement. If you already have stealth rock, you can just take one of those. And remember, because I am already talking about this, you do not have to set yourself to one setter and remover. You can take multiple. If multiple Pokemon can do hazards and cover some niche in your team, as a wall, as a pivot, as a breaker, it doesn't really matter as long as they can do that on top of hazards with little sacrifice. You can run multiple Pokemon for hazards, and that is often the optimal choice. As a matter of fact, stacking a bunch of hazard Pokemon and using hazards as a win condition is a perfectly valid and popular archetype. And finally, when in doubt, just pick Great Tusk. It's the most popular Pokemon for a reason. It sets, it removes, it walls, and it hits pretty freaking hard all in one slot. Starting a team with Great Tusk is probably the best approach for a new player, period. Honestly, every time I try to build without Great Tusk, I almost always end up realizing that Great Tusk was a better idea anyway. It sucks, but it's the truth. But that is the Gen 9 OU hazard metagame in a nutshell. Hazards aren't just cheap damage anymore, they are the backbone of your team and they are the core of the identity of this generation. I made a full master list of every setter, remover and niche option, even from lower tiers as well, so if you play UU, RU or whatever, I got you covered. You can check it out in the Pokemon Resources channel in my Discord. I came back to Pokemon after 2 generations and I am documenting everything I learned into this channel. I am live on Twitch almost every day farming the ladder, and subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.